Hello, everybody. This is Michael Millerman. Good to be with you. Back to some article readings today. And just so you know where I pulled this one from, there's a website, aldaily.com, Arts and Letters Daily, which collects book reviews, essays and articles, and other opinion pieces. So I was looking through that for something that we could read and discuss today, and I saw this, Rational Magic, Why a Silicon Valley Culture That Was Once Obsessed with Reason is Going Woo. And a little picture of a tarot figure here, the magician from the Raider White, is that how you say it? Raider tarot deck. So I thought, hey, this looks like a good one. Let's go over it. I am familiar with other things this author has written that I found pretty thought-provoking as far as cultural commentary goes. And I like this topic, actually, rational magic. I will mention that back before I started studying philosophy, I was reading a lot of books of mysticism. And one book along the way that I read was called Rational Mysticism, which combined arguments about the nature of the existence of God with that specifically mystical conversion that you undergo when you see yourself as part of something deeper and more fundamental than you normally do. The basic argument was that if God is the supreme and almighty being, then he won't just be the absolute other, and therefore somehow we're implicated in the divine and the holy in some way that's worth thinking about. That was rational mysticism. Don't worry about it, but there's a book about it if you want to look it up. But here, rational magic, why Silicon Valley is now obsessed with woo. By the way, another good book I was discussing earlier today by Evelyn Underhill on mysticism was one of the first places I saw the distinction between magic and mysticism. So there's a lot in this topic that if you follow the channel at all, you know is fun for us to discuss, important and interesting. But let's go to the article and see what Tara Isabella Burton has to say about reason and magic in Silicon Valley. By the way, thanks for being here. Good to be with you. Like, subscribe, comment, and all of that. Here we go. It broke open a shell in my heart. The young man I'll call Vogel said of reading Nietzsche's Human, All Too Human when we met for an interview earlier this year at a Brooklyn bar. I was very, very depressed at that time. Beauty in the world had become hauntingly distant. It existed over the horizon behind some mountain, and I couldn't access it. Vogel wears the owl of Minerva around his neck. It's a reference to the pursuit of wisdom, but the charm also invokes Hegel's maxim, the owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the falling of the dusk. The idea that true insight only comes late, at the end of an era. His bracelets, too, are symbolic. They represent Hugin and Munin, who in Norse mythology are the two ravens who sit on the shoulders of the god Odin, and whose names mean thought and memory. Vogel is part of a loose online subculture known as the post-rationalists, also known by the jokey endonym this part of Twitter, or TPOT. Never heard that before. They're a group of writers, thinkers, readers, and internet trolls alike who were once rationalists or members of adjacent communities, like the effective altruism movement, but grew disillusioned. Have you guys ever heard of that TPOT, this part of Twitter? Is that something? To them, rationality culture's technocratic focus on ameliorating the human condition through hyper-utilitarian goals, increasing the number of malaria nets in the developing world, say, or minimizing the existential risk posed by the development of unfriendly artificial intelligence, had come at the expense of taking seriously the less quantifiable elements of a well-lived human life. By the way, I'll just tell you here, I'm going to pause if you don't mind and make comments throughout. So one thing, when I opened my school, millermanschool.com, where I teach Strauss and Heidegger and so on, I had no expectation and no idea that this would happen, but I had people, most of the people who came to the school at first, who were good students, smart, intelligent, able to pay, interested in reading, and focused, were from the tech world, software engineers, tech founders, and things like that. I was very surprised by that. As I said, I had no exposure to that world previously, and I wasn't targeting it or anything like that. It just happened. So I guess there is some existential interest in the tech community when it comes to the nature of rationality culture's technocratic focus on ameliorating the human condition. Something you may know Leo Strauss wrote about in his account of modernity, and something obviously that Heidegger also wrote about. And that many of the right-wing anti-liberals discuss and criticize, including the traditionalists, Evola and Guénon. Okay, let's move on in the article. On Twitter, Vogel calls himself Prince Vogelfrei and tweets a combination of subcultural in-jokes, deeply earnest meditations on the nature of spiritual reality, and ambiguous amalgamations of the two. Example, get over all social FOMO, a fear of missing out, by contemplating the inaccessible experience of all history and prehistory, the primordial love stories of rodent-like ancestors. Vogelfrei in German means outlawed, but is literally free as a bird. Not a bad thing to be on the often intellectually siloed bird site. It's also a reference to a series of poems by Nietzsche sung by a prince who, imitating birds, sets himself spiritually free. Vogel's pursuit of truth had hardly been painless. Raised a pastor's son and educated in evangelical Christian homeschool circles, as a teenager he was living in Louisville, Kentucky, when he experienced a crisis of faith, or what he calls a deconversion. It was, he told me, a psychological shock, even a mystical experience. He had a vision of God being sacrificed on the altar of truth. Traditional Christianity now seemed untenable to him, untenable to the secular world, which seemed no less full of unexamined dogma, tinged with moral and intellectual unseriousness. Unwilling to enter the standard life tracks that seemed most easily available to him, ministry, say, or conservative politics, he moved to Seattle, where he worked for a while as a janitor at the University of Washington. He continued to seek out new avenues of intellectual and spiritual engagement. He got involved with his local rationalist community, ultimately running a rationalist reading group. Hello to everybody in the chat. Good to be with you. Thanks for being here. He also got involved with a group devoted to the practice of historical European martial arts, people he described as Renaissance fair pagan types. Reading Nietzsche around this time, he saw in the philosopher a model for how to bridge his intellectual and creative worlds. Nietzsche, Vogel argued, disarms some of the reasons that intelligent people often end up very cynical by doing better than them, but still coming back around to a perspective of hope, essentially. Vogel's enthusiasm for beauty, for poetry, for mythic references, for an esoteric strain of quasi-occult religious thought called traditionalism, capital T, all of this, his one-time compatriots in the rationality community might once upon a time have dismissed as New Age claptrap. By the way, as you listen to me read this, or if you're reading along or listening in a little bit, I would love to know in the comments whether this type of phenomenon, a movement from rationalism to post-rationalism, from a kind of technocratic to a kind of mystical, whether you've seen that, whether you've undergone it, whether you're noticing it, a turn to traditionalism, maybe on the Silicon Valley right or something like that, what you think the best way of thinking about this is in your experience with it. I go back to the article. But Vogel's personal journey from rationalism to post-rationalism is part of a wider intellectual shift in hyper-STEM-focused Silicon Valley circles and beyond toward a new openness to the religious, the numinous, and the perilously quote-unquote woo. Well, these people should definitely check out millermanschool.com. You might call it the post-rationalist turn, a cultural shift in both relatively normie and hyper-weird online spaces. Whether you call it spiritual hunger, reactionary atavism, or post-liberal epistemology, more and more young, intellectually inclined, and politically heterodox thinkers and would-be thinkers are showing disillusionment with the contemporary faith in technocracy and personal autonomy. I have to pause again to tell you anecdotally, I've definitely found that at my school, where most of the people who come to study Heidegger with me, or many of the people who do, and that means, we go through Being in Time, Contributions to Philosophy of the Event, and discuss Heidegger and related thinkers and related themes. A lot of them are from that world and thinking very seriously about it. They see, to return to the article, this combination as having contributed, that means the combination of technocracy and personal autonomy, having contributed to the fundamentally alienating character of modern Western life. Boy, there's so much that I want to say about this. I'm just tempted to stop after every sentence and comment. But let's go on for now. The chipper, distinctly liberal optimism of rationalist culture that defines so much of Silicon Valley ideology, that intelligent people using the right epistemic tools can think better and save the world by doing so, is giving way not to pessimism exactly, but to a kind of techno-apocalypticism. We've run up against the limits, political, cultural, social alike, of our civilizational progression, and something newer, weirder, maybe even a little more exciting has to take its place. Some of what we've lost, a sense of wonder, say, or the transcendent, must be restored. I'm going to pause the article. Again, we're reading at thenewatlantis.com, this article by Tara Isabella Burton called Rational Magic. so far. Very on point and quite interesting. It definitely maps onto a lot of my experiences online teaching. And I'd like to know what everybody else has to say about it as well. You should comment and make sure you go to the New Atlantis as well. Just a quick check-in on the chat here. Good to be with everybody. Nice to see familiar names and faces, as it were. About Bernardo Kastrup, not familiar with him, although the name's come up before. Maybe even you recommended it. So I'll have to follow up another time. But on this point about, where's this line I wanted to comment on? Yeah, the fundamentally alienating character of modern Western life. You know, I've been reading lately Leo Strauss's lectures on Hegel. And one of the points that Strauss makes when he's commenting on Hegel is that what's alienating about modern Western life, the very fact that you can experience alienation or a crisis of the self, a crisis of selfhood, as I was talking to somebody about earlier today, is a sign of historical progress. There couldn't be alienation or a crisis of the self in the ancient or classical world because there wasn't a developed self-consciousness. The notion of the individual and the nature of individuality was still incipient or nascent, wasn't mature, wasn't complete. It needed history to unfold and unfurl itself. So the fact that we can experience alienation, according to this reading of Hegel anyways, is a sign of the progress of self-consciousness, which must become self-alienated before it can really return to itself through all of its mediations. But there are other thinkers like the traditionalists and like Heidegger to a certain extent who see that differently. They want to try to overcome man's homelessness, man's rootlessness, and man's alienation. So the meaning of the fundamentally alienating character of modern Western life is still very much in dispute by the greatest thinkers we have to rely on and to help us through these difficult and all-important questions. Okay, back to the article though. Raise the sanity waterline. A quick primer for the less online. I assume that most of you who are here are more online and therefore know some of these references, but let's see a quick primer for the less online. The rationality community got its start on a few blogs in the early 2000s. The first, Overcoming Bias, founded in 2006 and affiliated with Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, was initially co-written by economics professor Robin Hanson and somewhat improbably Eliezer Yudkowsky, a self-taught AI researcher. Yudkowsky's chief interest was in saving the world from the existential threat posed by the inevitable development of a hostile artificial intelligence capable of wiping out humanity. And his primary medium for recruiting people to his cause was a wildly popular, nearly 700,000 word fan fiction called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. First time I'm hearing about this, maybe you guys are more familiar with it, in which Harry learns that the human mind is capable of far more magic than a wooden wand could ever provide. As its name might suggest, Overcoming Bias was dedicated to figuring out all the ways in which human beings have gotten very good at lying to ourselves, whether through fear of the unknown, or a desire for self-aggrandizement, or just plain being really bad at math, as well as all the ways in which we might train ourselves to think better. By 2009, Yudkowsky had decamped to his own blog, Less Wrong, which purported to help people be, well, just that, by hacking into our primordial predator-avoiding monkey brains and helping them to run new neurological software optimized for life in a complicated modern world. I see some nice questions in the chat. I'll turn to that a little bit later. Whoops. Both Less Wrong and the similarly focused Slate Star Codex, which rings a bell. Wasn't there some sort of scandal around the Slate Star Codex? Founded in 2013 by a Bay Area psychiatrist writing under the pen name Scott Alexander, attracted not just passive readers but enthusiastic commentators who were drawn to the promise of individual self-improvement, as well as the potential to discuss philosophy, science, and technology with people as uncompromisingly devoted to the truth as they believed they were. These commentators, a mixture of the traditionally educated and autodidacts, generally STEM-focused and with a higher than average share of people who identify as being on the autism spectrum, tended to be suspicious not just of humanities as a discipline, but of all the ways in which human emotional response clouded practical judgment. Central to the rationalist worldview was the idea that nothing, not social niceties, not fear of political incorrectness, certainly not unwarranted emotion, could or should get between human beings and their ability to apprehend the world as it really is. Well, Again, fighting the urge to comment here. You know, if you'd read Heidegger's Being and Time, a human being is always in a mood. The world is always disclosed in a mood. You can't apprehend the world as it really is by subtracting somehow emotion. But anyways, I'll leave that to the side. Returning to the article. One longtime rationalist of my acquaintance described the rationalist credo to me as truth for truth's sake. No topic, no matter how potentially politically incendiary, was off limits. I have to stop and comment. These people, apparently at that time, hadn't studied their Leo Strauss. Because if you study Leo Strauss, you know it's not the case that every truth is off limits. Because when you philosophize, when you think about the nature of the truth and about what is true, you automatically that way take one step beyond opinion. Because if there are many opinions, you're calling them into question to see which, if any of them is true, and maybe none of them is. But in calling opinion into question, Strauss often argued, you call into question the element of political life, because politics is the realm of opinion. The philosopher, when he takes one step further, he calls the social fabric of the political community into question. And if he has any sense of moral decency and any sense of justice, he won't do that so carelessly, because it's like pouring acid over the very thing that he needs, the political community, since the philosopher doesn't philosophize in isolation on Mars or on an island. So if they had read their Heidegger and Leo Strauss in the first place, they wouldn't have had these problems. Okay. We're helping. We're doing what we can, okay, to put people on the right track. No topic, no matter how potentially politically incendiary, was off limits. Truth, the rationalists generally believed, would set humanity free. Surely that meant tolerating the odd fascist, Nazi, or neo-reactionary in the Less Wrong or Slate Star Codex comments section. New Right leader Curtis Yarvin, then writing as Mencius Moldbug, was among them. But free and open debate, even with people whose views you find abhorrent, was so central to the rationalist ethos that the most obvious alternative, the kinds of harm-focused safeguarding central to fostering the ostensibly safe spaces of the social justice left, seemed unthinkable. In other words, they didn't want to stifle conversation, they wanted to encourage it, and they were less likely to quote-unquote deplatform and to have safe spaces. The rationalist universe soon expanded beyond the blogs themselves. Members of the wider Less Wrong community founded the Center for Applied Rationality in Berkeley in 2012. Its purpose was to disseminate rationalist principles more widely, or in rationalist parlance, to, quote, raise the sanity waterline, unquote. They focused on big picture global level issues, most notably and controversially Yudkowsky's pet concern, the X risk, eggs for existential, that we will inadvertently create unfriendly artificial intelligence that will wipe out human life altogether. There were rationalist sister movements, the transhumanists who believed in hacking and improving the quote-unquote wetware of the human body, and the effective altruists who posited that the best way to make the world a better place is to abandon cheap sentiment entirely, such as our attachment to those who live in proximity to us, and figure out how to maximize one's overall utility to the wider world. Once again, a ridiculous error that could have been avoided with a modicum of classical political philosophy. For example, Aristotle's Politics, not to mention many other great books that would have corrected that very stupid idea. In practice, that usually means making a lot of money at tech or finance jobs and then donating it to global health initiatives. There were commune-style rationalist group houses and polyamorous rationalist group houses devoted to modeling rational principles of good living. In his ethnography of the rationalists, journalist Tom Chivers recounts one group that uses a randomized but weighted math game to determine how to split restaurant bills fairly. Rationalist culture and its cultural shibboleths and obsessions became inextricably intertwined with the founder culture of Silicon Valley as a whole, with its faith in intelligent creators who could figure out the tech, mental, and physical alike that could get us out of the mess of being human. Investor Peter Thiel gave over $1 million to Yudkowsky's Machine Intelligence Research Institute. Elon Musk met his now ex-Grimes when the two bonded on Twitter over a rationalist meme. Meanwhile, the effective altruism movement took a major public relations hit late last year when one of its wealthiest proponents, Sam Bankman-Fried, was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and other crimes related to FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange he had founded. Okay, once again, thank you those of you who are here. Nice to see you, nice to be with you. Reading this article called Rational Magic, published in The New Atlantis, written by Tara Isabella Burton. Reading it together for the first time, I'm enjoying it. I think it's very on point with the other things we normally discuss, and interesting all in and of itself. Continuing now, vitamin deficiency. For many, rationality culture had at least initially offered a thrilling sense of purpose, a chance to be part of a group of brilliant, committed young heroes capable of working together to save all humanity. You have to shake your head at the naivety and the... Okay. One former high-level employee of the Center for Effective Altruism, who asked not to be identified by name, called the period he spent there in the 2010s the most exciting time of my career by quite a lot. Did these people think that general enlightenment had never been tried, assessed in its failures, criticized, and improved upon? Oops. The center had been founded in Oxford in 2011 to help maximize giving and career impact. I thought, this thing is perfect, he told me in a Zoom interview. We're going to figure out exactly where money should go and how to improve the world. And if we're wrong, we'll figure out how we're wrong and then we'll fix that. But he soon grew disillusioned. You know, I think you could tell the story of many well-meaning Enlightenment philanthropists right here with these words. He soon grew disillusioned. Not just with the utilitarianism of rationality culture, but when you ignore the nature of the realm of the political, when you ignore human foibles, when you ignore opinion, when you ignore the cave, when you shoot for general enlightenment, everybody soon grows disillusioned. But I digress. He soon grew disillusioned with the utilitarianism of rationality culture, which focused so intently on quantifiable markers of success. The number of people on college campuses recruited into EA-approved professional fields, say, that it seemed to leave out something profound about the other side of human life. Yeah, like the human side of human life. Effective altruism, he found, depowered a lot of people. It made them less interesting and vibrant as people, and more like trying to fit into a slightly soulless bureaucracy of good doing. Likewise, Tyler Alterman, a former director of growth at the Center for Effective Altruism, and now somewhere in the post-rationalist landscape, describes his experience there as analogous to a vitamin deficiency. I took that vitamin deficiency to just be the type of necessary sacrifice that one needs in order to think clearly and to put aside one's personal desires in order to effectively save and improve lives. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back for our effectively saving and improving lives. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Alterman said in a phone interview, only crushing depression, exacerbated by a severe stress-related gastrointestinal illness, made him re-examine his priorities. By the way, I don't mean to slight people. There's nothing wrong. Okay, someone wants to help the world, and they're doing it the best way they know how, and then they undergo, the scales fall off their eyes and so on. That's okay. It took a few years of basically being disabled to the point of not being able to work, to realize that, actually these things that I deemed to be irrational or like useless types of creativity were essential to my functioning. He longed to form genuine friendships based on mutual affinity and understanding, rather than by screening potential friends for qualities that would, quote, make them a good ally, which will contribute to you both working on existential risk together in an effective way. Yeah, that sounds like that would make life a little bit less, it would make it feel less alive, wouldn't it? If you put all your friends through a sort of, here's our corporate culture mission statement creed, and you can't blunt the edge of a rough and ready human life. Alterman wasn't just concerned with his own personal happiness, he was also increasingly convinced that intuition could be useful for the broader rationalist project, namely figuring out the truth about the world and using that knowledge to save it from itself. There's Tyler Alterman giving a TEDx talk on morality for a godless generation in 2014. Those of you who follow this channel, I know you know, but these are genuine human problems, questions, and concerns. How do I make the world better? How do I deal with the alienation, homelessness, loss of meaning, or maybe oversaturation of meaning? Maybe things mean too much. Maybe they mean too little. Of all of the different ways that you can deal with this, and there are some that you're familiar with and that you use and that work well for you, there's a kind of noble grandeur and simplicity, if I'm quoting Strauss from memory correctly here, in the return to the classical authors, especially those who write about politics, because they have a sane, sober, moderate, but not superficial, perceptive, intelligent, and I would even say true account of what it is to be in politics. And once you see that for what it is, You are, if you don't mind me quoting Strauss again here, spared from two extremes, unmanly contempt for politics on one hand and visionary expectations from it on the other. You sort of understand the sweet spot of a messy political human life. Anyways, I'm not saying they have answers to all of our problems, but they have answers to enough of them that they're worth reading. And that's not even a pitch for my school. You can study that anywhere you want, okay? Plato, Aristotle. A lot of these things about the nature of human living together and what you can really hope for and expect. I'll give you one of my favorite examples from Aristotle's Politics, roughly paraphrased, okay? When he's talking about the difficulty of a political community where everybody can agree with one another. Like, can't we all just get along? Maybe if we just give money to the right causes. He in effect says, think about when you take a trip with your friend, just you and a friend, you know, you and your wife, you and your girlfriend, you and your buddy, or you and a few people. You're going to fight over well, you might not fight, but you might quarrel over the music, over the temperature, the driver's too hot, the passenger's too cold, or, you know, if somebody wants the window open, somebody wants the window closed. You think about how many causes for quarrel there are, even in a very small group, 2, 3 people. And now you're telling me that you're going to have 100,000 people in your city and you're going to make everybody get along over not whether the window's open or closed, but distribution of resources and your opinion about justice and criminal law. You know, once you see those basic things, you can't unsee them. Now, back to the article. It turns out that intuition is incredibly powerful, an incredibly powerful epistemic tool, he said, that it just seems like a lot of rationalists weren't using because it falls into this domain of woo stuff. These critiques were not isolated ones. More and more rationalists and fellow travelers were yearning to address personal existential crises alongside global existential risks. The realm of the woo, you know, I guess like the trans-rational, post-rational, apparently irrational, started to look less like a wrong turn and more like territory to be mined for new insights. This wasn't totally out of left field, even for rationalists. They even had a word for such impulses, according to a former employee of the Center for Applied Rationality, Leah Libresco-Sargent, who writes regularly on how rationalism led her to her Catholic faith. They called it pika, after a compulsion that causes people to eat dirt or other non-food objects, and that is often a sign of nutritional imbalance. When people respond to something Sargent told me in a phone interview, there's some hunger here. What is that hunger aimed at? And can you aim it at the right thing? Whatever was out there and however you could or couldn't justify it with propositional truth claims or Bayesian reasoning, it probably pointed to something worth exploring. Okay, you're getting the gist. I take it. We're going to keep reading through the article here. I hope you're enjoying it. I find it to be engaging and well-written and all of that. And you know, on this channel, you can find videos on tarot and political philosophy, mysticism, intuition, and I have other side projects that discuss how all of this relates to entrepreneurs and founders and so on. But let's continue with the article and we'll comment as we go along. Better to be interesting and wrong. By the late 2010s, the rationalist landscape had started to shift, becoming increasingly open to investigating, if not necessarily the truth claims of spirituality, religion, and ritual, then at least some of their beneficial effects. A rationalist mega meetup I attended while researching an article in 2018, for instance, included a talk on tarot. Let me pause, by the way, just to show you something. This idea that you can find a way to explore a world, even as a rationalist, that you consider mystical or strange or something, there are ways of accessing it profitably. So I'll give you an example. I recently taught this book, The Phenomena of Awareness, Husserl, Cantor, Jung. Husserl was a philosopher who founded the school of phenomenology for all intents and purposes. Cantor was a mathematician who discovered that there are different kinds of infinity. And Jung, I assume you know something about Jung. Well, this book, for example, I'm not saying just this book, okay? You can even see it in other videos on this channel. It shows you how you can find ways to translate, you know? So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very simple example. You ask somebody, do you believe in astrology? Suppose they absolutely don't believe in astrology. No, zero credence given to the thought that the situation of the planets affects your personality. Okay, fine. Is there anything you can do with the language of astrology, nevertheless, that is interesting and profitable? Well, if you've ever read the newspaper, something, it's like, oh, today's Capricorn forecast, you're going to have a great day or have a bad day. Don't stub your toe. And if someone smiles at you, go give them your phone number. But serious astrology, it gets into more detail. Like, here's where the sun was, here's where the moon was, here's where all the other planets were. And it has developed a vocabulary of how that is to be interpreted at the level of personality characteristics. So again, even if you reject astrology's claim to affect personality, what you have in astrology, if you can translate it, is a language of psychological difference and character types. So you can actually just deprive it of its astrological significance, but invest it with characterological significance. And then, that little operation enriches what you can say. So instead of saying this guy's a coward or, this guy's a cheat, you can start to use the complex, maybe in some cases more complex, if you wanted to, language of astrological types. Like, you know what I'm saying? So same with tarot. You don't have to treat it as telling the future. You can treat it as symbolizing through the medium of the imagination certain moments, or you get the point. Okay, so I think you get the point. If you don't, I'm happy to elaborate. By the way, here in the comment, BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, going really well. I have my first competition coming up in June. Pulling a Mark Zuckerberg, okay, if you guys heard about that. So where are we here? Wider rationalist verse institutions like Leverage Research, a controversial Peter Thiel-funded think tank that employed heavily from within the rationalist and effective altruism communities, began to look into more esoteric topics such as intention research, how practitioners of bodywork, energy healing, or mesmerism could use nonverbal cues to subtly influence the mindset of the people on whom they worked. The rationalists weren't the only ones experiencing pika. Over the past decade or so, several different intellectual and less than intellectual subcultures have become far more open than they once were to the language and imagery of the spiritual, the magical, and the religious, and to the traditions that once sustained them. I can't help interjecting here all the time. Dugin, in his book, The Fourth Political Theory, he argues that there's a quote-unquote return of myth and archaic, the mythical and the archaic, because at the crisis of modernity, the onset of post-modernity, the things that modernity had marginalized or that it had outcast, so it had outcast the mystical, the Dionysian, the underground, the archaic, the subterranean, all of these kinds of things. But as modernity completes itself, or as it falls into a crisis mode, everything that it had rejected comes back into play. And it's free for reconsideration outside of the dogmatism of modernity. So it's just, Strauss said something similar about the effect that Nietzsche had. When you shake the tradition, everything that had just been received in a customary way is now there for the taking, but even more interestingly, there for the thinking through, there for the assessing, analyzing, and understanding. So something like that described here as well. An openness suddenly, maybe experiencing the crisis of technocratic rationalism, an openness to the spiritual, the magical, and the religious, and to the traditions that once sustained them. There's the rise of what you could call popular neo-Jungianism, figures like Jordan Peterson, who point to the power of myth, ritual, and a relationship to the sacred as a vehicle for combating postmodern alienation, often in an uneasy alliance with traditionalist Christians. A whole article could be written on Peterson's close intellectual relationship with Roman Catholic Bishop Robert Barron. There's the progressive coded version you can find on TikTok where witchcraft and activism and sage cleansing and quote-unquote manifesting coexist in a miasma of vibes. There's the openly fascist version lurking at the margins of the new right, where blood and soil nationalists, paleo bodybuilders, Julius Evola reading traditionalists like Steve Bannon, and Catholic sedevacantist, don't even know what that means, I'm sorry to say, podcasters make common cause in advocating for the revival of the mores of a mystic and masculinist past, all the better to inject life into the sclerotic modern world. But the specific post-rationalist version of this tendency is all the more striking for the fact that its genesis lies in a subculture ostensibly dedicated to the destruction of all thoughts non-rational. For example, the author continues, when I was writing a piece on the rationalists for Religion News Service in 2018, I attended a rationalist-affiliated secular solstice in New York, a non-theistic version of Hanukkah, in which a series of battery-operated candles were lit and subsequently extinguished to represent the snuffing out of superstitions. It's kind of funny. The ceremony culminated, or would have culminated if a stubborn candle hadn't refused to go out, in total darkness, during which we were invited to meditate upon the finality of death, the non-existence of God, and the sole avenue for hope, supporting, financially, intellectually, or otherwise, quixotic. How do you actually pronounce that? I always pronounce quixotic. Maybe it's quixotic. Quixotic. Scientific initiatives capable of prolonging life or of eliminating death altogether. Okay, so God is dead, so man must become immortal, something like that. It's possible, of course, to look at the rise of the post-rationalists as merely the kind of development you'd see in any online subculture that lasts more than a couple of years. The replacement of one model of discourse or fandom by its younger, self-proclaimedly punker cousin. Certainly there's something even more extremely online and extremely 2020s about post-rationalism's freewheeling eclecticism. By the way, I'm sure everybody who's still here, who was here or who will be here, is familiar with this phenomenon. I mean, you've seen it for sure on this channel. You've seen it in other people that we read and discuss, whether it's Dugan, Evola, or whether it's even Schmidt in some way, and their followers today, the right-wing Nietzscheans. She's definitely putting her finger on something that is there. Certainly, there's something even more extremely online about all this. If rationality culture arose out of a very specific early 2000s blog culture, big-name essayists like Les Wrong's Eliezer Yudkowsky and Slate Star Codex's Scott Alexander, meticulously parsed by hyper-serious interlocutors in the comments section, post-rat culture is no less wedded to its own particular medium, Twitter, along with a back-channel network of private group chats and Discord servers and Zoom rooms. If you're in this online, mystical, post-rationalist Twitter world, M_Millerman. Follow me there, and I'll follow you. We can contribute to Twitter's post-rationalist, mystical renaissance. Half joking. Like their rationalist forebears, the post-rationalist community has its own blogger luminaries. Venkatesh Rao at Ribbon Farm. I must be getting old because I don't know what any of these people are, but that's okay. Sarah Perry, also a Ribbon Farm contributor and author of the Antinatalist Manifesto, Every Cradle is a Grave. Sounds like a cheery book. And David Chapman at Meaningness. But the post-rationalists also have a more anarchic side, marked by the ubiquity of pseudonymous Twitter micro-celebrities, like Eigenrobot and Zero HP Lovecraft, that now sounds familiar, who has rejected the post-rat label but is widely followed by them, whose accounts like Vogel's sometimes blend sincerity and shit posting. They share some of rationality culture's shibboleths, a fondness for speaking in obscure jargon, a commitment to an Overton window so wide it might as well be a glass house, a contempt for the wokeness they see as stifling free intellectual discourse. But they're also more likely to embrace the seemingly irrational, religious ritual, tarot, meditation, or the psychological meets spiritual self-examination called shadow work in pursuit of spiritual fulfillment and a vision of life that takes seriously the human need for beauty, meaning, and narrative. Today's post-rationalists might be, for example, practitioners of Vajrayana Buddhism, or they might adopt the carefully choreographed practices of self-proclaimed radical agnostic and ritual artist Rebecca Fox, who designs bespoke rituals she refers to as psycho-spiritual technology. Some of this I'm unfamiliar with. I'm hearing for the first time. I'm kind of laughing because it's entertaining to me. The movement's defining maxim, according to at least one person familiar with the movement I spoke to, might be a proclamation by writer Sarah Perry. It's better to be interesting and wrong than it is to be right and boring. Yeah, maybe. It's also better to be interesting and right than it is to be wrong and boring. What's this? The virtue of darkness is to face reality at its harshest without looking away. A speaker at a secular solstice event. You know, I kind of want to tell you this quote of Leo Strauss's about philosophy should resist the desire to be edifying. It's intrinsically edifying, but it should resist the desire to be edifying. But he also says, I think it's in that context, that just because a philosophy is terrifying or horrifying doesn't mean that it's true. That made me think of this, the virtue of darkness, to face reality at its harshest without looking away. Like the harsher the teaching, the truer the teaching. No, that's not necessarily correct. I don't mean to say that that's what this dude is saying, but I'm really enjoying this article. I hope you are too. You should, in order to give credit where it's due, thenewatlantis.com, Tara Isabella Burton, Rational Magic. Great article. Having fun reading this with you. And I see, guys, I appreciate you being here, commenting and all of that. I just want to keep going through the article for now. But you should definitely comment, stay, subscribe, like, share, etc. The online rationalist ecosystem had become wider and weirder, sparked in part by the organic, if tech-boosted formation of communities on Twitter, where people you may know algorithms were increasingly connecting members of the burgeoning post-rationalist scene with old-school rationalists. These connections only intensified during the pandemic, when people's lives moved more online and the sacrifices engendered by isolation made many under the rationalist umbrella more conscious of the importance of embodied community. Tyler Alterman, expanding upon a term he first heard on the Intellectual Explorers podcast by Peter Limberg. Sorry, I have to stop and comment. I've been on Peter's podcast a couple times before. You should definitely check out his work. It was the Intellectual Explorers podcast. Now I think it's called The Stoa. So definitely check out Peter Limberg. I want to give credit where it's due. Shout out, good guy. I'll read that again. Tyler Alterman, expanding upon a term he first heard on the Intellectual Explorers podcast, Explorers Club podcast by Peter Limberg, has called this new wider social landscape the meta-tribe. In a September 2020 Twitter thread influential enough that several people I spoke to for this piece seemed aware of it, Alterman declared the year 2020 to be the dawn of the meta-tribe. The meta-tribe, Alterman wrote, is neither nihilist nor locked onto an ethical system. It has political opinions without being left, right, or center. Meta-tribers often appear to be heterodox. The meta-tribe, further, is scientific without scientism. It is spiritual while being neither New Age nor traditionally religious. It includes both members of the specific post-rationalist subculture, as well as thinkers from other subcultures caught up in the wider post-rationalist turn. The meta-tribe is not the only term used by members or ideological fellow travelers. Others call it the liminal web, the sense-making web, or the intellectual deep web. Who counts as meta-tribe members, rationalists, post-rationalists, meta-modernists, or accounts that just post good memes is hardly set in stone. But we can identify in the modern meta-tribe a distinct cultural and intellectual identity, at once hyper-aware of the problems posed by human irrationality and committed to the notion that our emotional and spiritual lives are as fundamental to human flourishing as our intellectual ones. Being allergic to political ideology, as Alterman told me in our interview, meta-tribe members are often political magpies, taking their practices and theories from across the ideological spectrum, even as their commitment to radical openness renders them at times uncomfortably close to more explicit right-wing circles like the intellectual dark web, at least according to their progressive critics. Hold on a second, I want to show you guys something, although maybe you already know it. Where is it? Well, I think it's this. The mimetic, can you see this? Must be on screen, yeah? Anyways, it's called The Mimetic Tribes of Culture War 2.0. It's published 2018, medium.com, The Stoa, Peter Limberg. And I think this was one of the articles, okay, you got to sign up, sorry. But I think this is one of the articles where he laid out all of these various tribes, all of these various online communities and subcultures. Anyway, I thought I'd show you that, but if you haven't seen it before, take a look. You might have to get the free account to take a look. But let's go back here. Wait a minute. Let me pause. How do I put there we go. Michael Millerman. Okay, I'm reading this article. Good to be with you. Evola was a big fan of these people, a big fan of Evola. Where does Dugan stand on Rurik? I have no idea who that is, I'm sorry to say. I don't have a position on him because I don't know who he is, and I've never seen Dugan write about him, so I can't comment. This word from earlier, seda vacantist, from a Latin phrase, means the chair is empty. Those taking this view consider themselves Catholic, yet believe the current pope espouses heresy, which disqualifies him from office. Okay, thank you for that clarification. I didn't know that. Vacancy, as in Catholics who do not believe the pope to be legitimate. Got it. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, here we go. So these people, the meta-tribe people, they're interested in dissolving the barriers between intellectual disciplines, as well as between the mental and embodied life. Alterman compares them to ancient Greeks, where it wasn't that unusual for someone to be both a philosopher and a wrestler. patting myself on the back for starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu so I can be among the people who pretend to be interested in both philosophy and wrestling. No, it's amazing. If you've never done a martial art, well, try one. I recommend Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because I started doing it and I love it. While a few of them find a home among the seemingly implausible dogmas of traditional organized religion, they're far more willing than their rationalist forebears to see in religious, spiritual, or even esoteric or occult practice an avenue towards self-transformation in the service of a meaningful life. They at once evoke the classic Californian ideology, famously described in 1995 by Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron, equal parts hippie mysticism and relentless self-development, and subvert its linear narrative of human progress. John Vervaeke, and by the way, I saw earlier in the chat someone asking me, do I know him? What's my relationship to him? I've never met him, never spoken with him. I once asked him whether, by email, I reached out to see whether he wanted to collaborate with the school in some capacity, never heard back from him, so I have no interaction with him. John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist at the University of Toronto, whose work many of the meta-tribe cite as highly influential, calls the meta-tribe's practice a reinventio. In Latin, Vervaeke told me in a Zoom interview, inventio means both invent and discover. It's all mixed together, Vervaeke said. This is one of the most culturally significant things that is happening right now, this reinventio of what sacredness means and what that experience of sacredness points to, which has moved out of being the proprietary purview of the established religions. Religions, Vervaeke says, are still important partners in this process, but they don't have a monopoly on it anymore. Okay, some of you may find it annoying that I'm reading the article, then stopping to comment, reading the article, then stopping to comment, but a lot of things are coming to my mind as we read it, and I want to tell you. So, this book I got not long ago, newly released this year, Leo Strauss on Plato's Euthyphro. So what's the connection? Why am I showing you? Those of you who are in the chat, you have any idea what Plato's Euthyphro is about, at least ostensibly and on the surface of things? So there's a dramatic context. The character Euthyphro is going to court. He's got an accusation against his father. He sees Socrates. He has a conversation with Socrates. But the conversation concerns, roughly speaking, okay, what makes something sacred? Or what is piety? What is the proper relationship to the gods? And do the gods love something because it's holy? Or is it holy because they love it? A very famous question in the history of philosophy and theology discussed in this book. It just goes to show, I'm pointing that out, I'm not even commenting more about it. There are a million things we could say about that book. But I point it out because I just want to show you the issue. What is sacredness? What's the relationship of sacredness to the divine? What is holy? What is piety? These are all questions that are not only of great relevance now and great significance now, but with so many of these other questions, we always have resources, thoughtful, intelligent resources at the roots of our tradition. For example, here with Plato. I just had to put in a plug for that. So this reinventio of what sacredness means and what that experience of sacredness points to, which has moved out of being the proprietary purview of the established religions. Religions, to repeat, are still important partners in this process, but they don't have monopoly on it anymore. Vervaeke's work deals with what he calls the modern meaning crisis, the idea that we don't understand what exactly we're living for. According to Vervaeke, rationalist culture, to say nothing of our contemporary world more broadly, has in its technocratic worship of human computing power lost sight of the more complex questions involved in living the good life, or what he calls wisdom. I'm biting my tongue. Our Cartesian reduction of rationality to sort of computational abilities, and then the reduction of that to just communication and communicative manipulation, we have lost a lot, said Vervaeke. That notion of rationality that rationalists are making use of is seriously truncated, seriously missing what most of the ancient world thought they were referring to. They used words like logos and ratio, and those older notions of rationality were bound up with wisdom. We're bound up with practice, with the use of the imaginal, that which the imagination can transform rather than the merely imaginary, with ritual, transformation, aspiration, and so all these things are coming back in. Pause. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, you should look up Vervaeke if you don't know him. You should watch his content. I've seen some of his presentations, which are very able expositions of difficult philosophical notions and ideas with a clear sensitivity to the crisis of meaning and a desire to reconnect people to a more, to a way of looking and being and speaking that is no longer uprooted and alienated and cut off and all of that. I will say that, so I do like what I've seen of his. Okay, he's got many long lecture series, including a new one I think on After Socrates or something. And he's familiar with Neoplatonic thinkers and mystics. I saw he had even a lecture on Henri Corbin, which is nice in his series. So definitely check him out. But one thing I'll point out, I watched his interview with Jordan Peterson. Maybe he's had several, but I watched one of them. And besides other things you could say about that interview, they were talking about Plato, and they were talking about the notion of logos in Plato. And as somebody who has studied Strauss and Strauss's Platonic political philosophy for, over a decade now, and really tried to understand the claim that for Plato, the claim that Strauss makes, that for Plato, political philosophy is at the heart of philosophy. There's this dominant concern with understanding politics in Plato. And that's a concern that the Neoplatonists didn't focus on quite as much. They emphasized other parts of his teaching, let's say. So Strauss and Strauss's Plato are very different from the Neoplatonic Plato. Well, in the conversation between Vervaeke and Peterson, what was clear was that Vervaeke, it seemed to me that Vervaeke is very much on the Neoplatonic side of studying Plato. In other words, that he overlooked the centrality of Plato's interest in and what Plato discovered about politics. I don't know whether that's the case, so if any of you are eager viewers of his, I would love to know, does he talk more about Plato's politics, Plato's political teaching, the significance of Socrates' life and death for Plato, the emphasis on law, for example, in the Minos and the Laws? I would just like you to tell me if you know. But for sure, that's important because there are different ways you can place the emphasis when you read Plato, and they make almost all the difference. Wisdom, to continue this very engaging article, for Vervaeke, as for the meta-tribe generally, is something distinct from if related to the raw computational processing powers so prized by the rationalist community. It involves a holistic approach to thinking. What does it mean to live a good life? That can't be quantified the way you can quantify, say, the number of malaria nets you've sent to the developing world. It's also, unlike the often hyper-individualistic and autodidact-focused rationality culture, deeply wedded to a conception of tradition and of the collected insights of others more broadly as a source of intellectual value. To mature in wisdom, after all, takes a village, says Vervaeke. You have to acquire identities and roles and responsibilities and virtues in order to properly become wise. That takes a community that is willing to hang with you for a long time, which means the best shot of finding such a community is one that has a tradition and a history behind it. In this sense, the Meta-Tribe project is as much about recovery as it is about progression. On that notion that, is wisdom primarily a matter of progress, or is it more so a matter of recovery? There's another nice essay I want to point you to by Leo Strauss. Maybe we'll read it together on the channel at some point. It's called Progress or Return. In this sense, the Meta-Tribe project is as much about recovery as it is about progression. Reviving a vision of communal life, communal responsibility, and communal reverence for the sacred that the atomized modern world has rendered increasingly rare, while still embracing the freedom and technological comfort modernity has made possible. As another plugged-in post-rationalist who tweets at Big Master Troll told me via Twitter DM, there's a sense where modernity is kind of great because sacredness leads to irrationality, problems, wars, etc. That maybe trading off a bit of guaranteed meaning for more choice, warm homes, and less violence is actually a pretty good deal. At the same time, post-rationalists are basically all mourning the loss of enchantment. Here's another way of stating the argument, okay? People disagree over religion. Who's God? Whose divine law? Whose way of life? And if you want to get people to not disagree over what they consider to be the deepest, most important aspect of their lives, which, as you understand, can lead to divisions between us and them, can lead to wars of conquest, wars of annihilation, and so on, certainly wars of conversion, then it's easy. Just deprive people of their religious faith. The disenchantment of the world is part of a political project designed to unite mankind in their shared but low common denominator of a desire for safety and security. But in order for you to rely on the low common denominator of a desire for safety and security, not that there's anything wrong with that, you have to disenchant people, because once again, if they believe that they can suffer and be rewarded in the afterlife, that safety and security here and now is not as important as divine rewards there and then you can no longer rely on them as political partners in your project of general enlightenment. So there's a whole problem here, so that's what he's talking about. Disenchantment is the price that you pay for safety and security to some extent, but you can't have it both. So when you want to re-enchant the world, you're opening the door to alternatives that require thinking through, let's say. What exactly is the trade-off between enchantment and, as he puts it here, warm homes and less violence? Another complicated question that Strauss, among others, walks us through. In a way, he wrote, you can summarize post-rationality as like, how do you get the sacred without violence? Man, yeah, I see every sentence of this essay I would like to stop and do a half an hour discussion with you about, because even this, how do you get the sacred without violence? I think we could easily spend a long time discussing the meaning of that question and the various answers to that question, okay? But it wouldn't be possible to stop everywhere. To discover the laws of magic and become, continuing the article. If the meta-tribe reflects anything about our wider cultural moment, it is our shared disillusionment with the broader liberal optimism the rationalists have come to embody. The promise proffered by so much of Silicon Valley that we can hack our way to enlightenment, transcending our humanity along the way, no longer seems plausible amid the broad ennui, boredom, and general pessimism that has settled into our culture over the last decade. As Vogel puts it, the reason that history feels both out of control and stagnant is because we're alienated from it. Our spirits can't actively participate in it. We constantly engage with it in terms of geopolitics or trying to build the right kind of AI or design the right kind of society. We are like, can we figure out the formula for making people into great founders? At its best, the kind of holistic questioning preferred by many meta-tribe members offers a way forward beyond either liberal optimism or the atavistic pessimism of the new right. Does the new right have an atavistic pessimism? I see a lot of optimism on the new right, frankly. But okay, how can we effectively and altruistically advocate for the good life of others when we ourselves aren't sure what the good life even means? Socrates, okay? If you understand the meaning and the life of Socrates, it's inquiring into what is the good life? What would I need to know? What are the highest objects of man's aspiration? Justice, goodness, beauty. He even asks in some of his dialogues, what is gain? What is courage? What is moderation? What is justice? In the quest for wisdom, you have philosophy as the quest for wisdom. So Socrates is a great model for, in my opinion, when I read this line, wherever that was, where's that line? How can we advocate for the good life of others when we ourselves aren't sure what the good life even means? That's what Socrates did, because he, not knowing exactly what the good life meant, pursued it. That's philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom. And in doing so, he somehow brought other potential philosophers along the way with him. He didn't bring the non-potential philosophers along the way, all the way, but okay, back to the article. Man, I don't know if it's the third cup of coffee or if it's just that I really like these topics, but I feel like I want to comment on everything. It's also true that meta-tribe discourse remains more wedded to contemporary liberal individualism than many of its members might care to admit. While they are often hungry for and vocally supportive of the kind of communal spiritual practices and rituals that might anchor a well-lived life, they're more interested in spirituality's function, how it contributes to personal fulfillment, than in its claim to truth, which they largely treat as irrelevant or obsolete. So they have like a pragmatic, if it works or what does it work for. The post-rationalist interest in religion and spirituality, says Leah Libresco-Sargent, can be likened to the wider meta-tribe interest in psychedelics. Both are tools in the service of better thinking or optimized life perspective. She describes their general mindset as, I think, religion is very powerful and it's interesting that religious people have greater life satisfaction. So should I try doing religion like it's recreational drugs to see where that takes me? Religion, meditation, magic, occultism, shadow work, all these in the meta-tribe model are mere avenues for self-development and self-transcendence. Cast a love spell, go to church, attend a 5 rhythms ecstatic dance class, take psychedelic mushrooms. All of these functionally amount to the same thing, an injection of what foundational post-rationalist writer David Chapman calls meaningness. Meaningness, Chapman writes on his website, entails that meaning is real but not definite. It is neither objective nor subjective. It is neither given by an external force nor a human invention. It requires, he says, taking from the eternalist stance, the commitment that human beings do and indeed should experience the world as a locus of meaning, and from the nihilist stance, the rejection that there's a single eternal source of meaning behind it. Or as Sarah Perry puts it, there's no one true ritual order that's going to survive forever. The best hope is maybe there are ritual micronutrients or vitamins that we can discover and then figure out how to supply them under different technological regimes. Okay, I personally find that kind of formulation extremely off-putting, but I'm sure other people relate to it. Spirituality exists not in itself, but for us. You know, when I read these passages too, guys, I'm going to make a quick comment. I guess I'll highlight it here on screen. When I read passages like this, it's one of the reasons why you should consider, if you ever have the time and the inclination, you should consider reading something like Heidegger's Being and Time, where by page 140 or so, he discusses what it is for there to be meaning given the kind of being that we are. Because somehow all of these conversations, they're not fully grounded in an understanding of the structure and nature of human existence. They're groping for it, they're formulating it the way they can, they're roughing it, and they're saying something. But when you go deep with a book like Heidegger's Being and Time, you start to see passages like this and kind of inquiries like this, I would say much more distinctly, much more clearly, and you sort of get deeper. Because it's, what do we even mean when we talk about meaning? It doesn't have to be a circular nonsense question. Heidegger, okay, it's difficult. Being and Time is a difficult book, so I'm not saying it's an easy read, but, you know, Dasein, neither objective nor subjective. Anyways, that's just a little plug for you to read Heidegger. And again, not just because I offer courses on him, but because wherever you read him, however you read him, he offers you some depth that you can tell these people want and would benefit from. What we see here is the positing that meaning is good and important and out there, but also the conviction that in practice, the precise contours of that meaning are up to us to decide. It's spirituality for a secular age, anchored by the conviction that reality is downstream of our personal psychological power. If there is a doctrine underpinning both rationalist and post-rationalist thought, it is this quintessential liberal faith in human potential, combined with an awareness of the way in which human imaginal power does not merely respond to, but actively shapes the world around us. The rationalists dreamed of overcoming bias and annihilating death. The post-rationalists are more likely to dream of integrating our shadow selves or experiencing oneness. But both camps evince a profound faith in what we might call human godliness. The idea that we are not only the recipients of the world around us, but also its creators. Or, you know, maybe it would be more accurate here to say co-creators. Like Heidegger said, we're a thrown projection. Projection means somehow we're at the root, but thrown means, from another perspective, we're not. You know, so maybe there's something standing behind us and we take it into our hands and form it and fashion it. In that sense, not only the recipients, but also the co-creators, or the stewards, the preservers. Indeed, it's little wonder that so many meta-tribe members find themselves drawn to esoteric or occult spiritual schools of thought like chaos magic or traditionalism, schools in which it is difficult to distinguish the human power to shape and persuade from the outright supernatural. In his Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, perhaps old-school rationalists' most effective recruiting text, Eliezer Ledkowski is clear that part of the appeal of rationality is the promise of self-overcoming, of becoming more than merely human. Harry, we learn, wants to discover the laws of magic and become a god. Yet it is rationality in the end that gives Harry the godlike powers of understanding and shaping his world, a world that Ledkowski tells us will one day be one in which the descendants of humanity have spread from star to star and won't tell the children about the history of ancient Earth until they're old enough to bear it, and when they learn, they'll weep to hear that such a thing as death had ever once existed. The meta-tribe may have different methods, but their goal too is self-transcendence. As Vogel told me, both Nietzscheanism and the occult discourse of the Hermeticism and even modern rationality, a thread through all of these things is the implicit desire to become a god. Doing the psycho-spiritual work necessary to unchain yourself from mere human facticity is the only way out of the tragic mire of ordinary human life. Once again, impossible not to comment. There's so many things that I think we could discuss and we should say about what we've been reading, which, by the way, is Rational Magic at the New Atlantis by Tara Isabella Burton. We're not done the article yet. Okay, let's just read these two lines. Does Vogel personally wish to be a god? He declined to answer on the record. Okay, great article. I hope you also enjoyed it. Interesting to read. It gave us a lot of opportunity to comment. And I'm going to take one such opportunity here again. So let's go back to this this right here. So their goal is self-transcendence, the implicit desire to become a god. And Vogel doesn't answer whether he wishes to be a god. Many, many things we could say about it, but I want to tie it in once more to Plato's Euthyphro and to Strauss's commentary on Plato's Euthyphro. Then we'll go to the chat and then we'll wrap it up. So one of the things in Plato's Euthyphro, the character named Euthyphro, oh, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. One of the things that they discuss is what is piety, as I mentioned. Piety, you'd consider a correct attitude towards the gods, something like that. And I'm going to give you a quick version of what Strauss brings out as his commentary and then relate it back to the article. Normally, piety means worshiping the customary gods according to custom. So you could say, if you grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family, piety would be worshiping the customary God in the customary way. Okay? Worshiping the customary God in the customary way is a kind of definition of piety or a view of piety. But Euthyphro suggests, and again, I'm skipping a lot of details to get to the point, Euthyphro suggests that piety is rather imitating the gods. Thank you for that super chat, I appreciate it. That piety is imitating the gods. So on one hand, customary worship of the customary gods in the customary manner, and on the other hand, imitating the gods. Now, when you imitate the gods, it's completely different from worshiping them in the customary way, because imitating them means wanting to be godlike. You see, just like we had right here, wanting to be a god, wanting to be like a god, wanting to do as the gods do, wanting to be a god. So Euthyphro, Strauss brings out in his commentary, his answer is that you should want to imitate the gods. Well, there are a few problems. Number one, imitating the gods is not only not the same as worshiping them, but it almost is throws down the gauntlet or throws down a challenge to traditional worship, because it says higher than the traditional worship of the gods is the imitation of the gods. Higher than the traditional religion is this new Silicon Valley technocratic religion. Higher than faith in a faith community is deification. It's amazing that this issue that we're discussing in relation to Silicon Valley in 2023 is very much related to the theme of a dialogue that Plato wrote more than 2,000 years ago. Very interesting. I'll just add here one other thing in passing. Strauss says there are many gods in the Greek pantheon, and the question for Euthyphro is, which god is he going to imitate? And he implicitly imitates Zeus because Zeus is the most just god. And Strauss derives the following observation, that now Euthyphro is no longer just following the gods. Rather, he's taking a step above the gods. He's looking to what is it that makes the best god best? It's the fact that he's just. So it's now no longer the gods that are the authorities. It's justice that is the authority, the idea of justice. And so Euthyphro goes from the traditional faith. By the way, Euthyphro doesn't know that he's doing this. When Socrates talks to characters, they usually aren't fully aware of what they're doing, but he brings out the implications, and then Strauss brings them out even further. So the desire to become a god, just wanted to show you, everything new is old again, or everything old is new again, whatever. Okay, let's go to the chat for a moment here. Again, I thank you guys for the super chats. That was kind of you, and really everybody who's been here listening and watching. I hope that you got something out of this. Give all credit where it's due to the publication and to the author who did a very nice job. Jeanette, thanks. I'm glad that you enjoyed this. Rev King, Meme Analysis, just released a video called Witch Talk versus Puritans. So I guess this is a whole thing. Thanks for that reference. Didn't even know really what a lot of this stuff was before. So Vervaeke doesn't get into politics and law. It's much more through a Neoplatonic hermeneutic with guys like Eric Pearl. I wish you would get into more the political, but that's why we have you. Thanks. So those of you who do follow Vervaeke and you like his commentaries on Plato and Neoplatonism, don't overlook the alternative of Platonic political philosophy, primarily represented by Leo Strauss and his school, which is a legacy that I do my part to, honor and continue. So let's stop it there. Great to be with you. Nice to see you. Appreciate you being here. Like, subscribe, etc. Oh, I forgot to mention, I have a new 30-day introduction to philosophy. The link you see on screen somewhere, right there at the bottom, millermanschool.com/p/intro. It's delivered by email. It's one email a week for 4 weeks. It talks about Plato's political philosophy, about Heidegger, about some other things. So sign up for that if you want to. And anyway, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.